If it's true that success leaves clues, then we should definitely be watching what the central banks are doing with their money. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what they've been up to and what they're doing today. And following their lead, you'll be setting up your future by protecting and growing your wealth. So stay tuned. Market Disruptors, welcome back to another Thursday episode. We talk about investing, specifically investing into new technologies like cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, blockchain, etc. On Tuesdays, we do the video series about before you're investing, success, business, mindset, so you can grow more money. I love to answer all your questions and comments below. I pick questions for a video every Monday where I answer them on video. If I pick your question and answer it on the video, you get $10. If it's the best question of the week, you get $50. Only rule is you have to be subscribed in order to win. So you got to make sure you subscribe to the channel before you submit your question, and you have to watch the question and answer video and message me to claim your money. We're going to talk today about central banks and their flight to gold. What are they doing with their money? How can we protect and grow our money? So the history of gold, about 5,000 years. It's been the base currency for all governments out there. For every major currency in the world, gold has kind of been the basis of that. We have evidence of this going thousands of years BC before Christ. We found like the gold of Troy expedition in Turkey, and that was about 2,500 years before Christ. Gold had been highly valued even before it was money. And we know this is the path that money goes down. It starts as a collectible, then goes to a store of value, then goes to a medium of exchange. And we have history that there was great lengths. People went to all lengths to mine gold, even though it wasn't money. They just knew that it was valuable and they wanted it. And part of that was because they wanted to become a store of value. First it was a collectible, then it became a store of value. The first forms of gold coins we saw when it started to become money was about 700 years before Christ, 700 BC. Then gold kind of became the global standard. In the 1300s and 1400s, the European countries kind of all came together and standardized gold coinage. And once they had standardized gold coins that were like the same weight and size and represented the same value, then they were able to freely trade. When trade exploded, it allowed people to specialize in what they were good at even better, and then that allowed everything to flourish. From like the 1400s all the way through the 1800s into the 1900s, about 600-700 years of just massive prosperity once the whole world kind of got on this and was able to freely trade. In the 1800s, we got into paper gold certificates, and so we've talked about this as like a scaling solution. They said, hey, park your gold in the bank, and then we'll just give you paper certificates, and they're easy to transfer. So we saw that in about the 1800s. In the late 1800s, we got into World War I and then into World War II, and we saw that the governments needed more money for the wars, more than they had in gold. And so that's when the fractional reserve banking system came in, so that instead of having dollars, fiat and gold being 1-to-1, now it was 2-to-1 gold and 3-to-1 gold, so they could continue to get more and more money to fight World War I and into World War II. Back in the Roman Empire, I'm sure you're well aware, right? Rome was trying to build the Roman Empire. They're trying to basically take over the world, and it gets very expensive to build an empire. And so they had to devalue their currency. And over 200 years, they devalued it at 90%. We managed to do that in a fraction of the time, but basically for the same thing. For war, to expand empires. In the late 1800s, I have a picture up on the screen. J.P. Morgan went before Congress and testified about banking, about character, about credit, debt, all these things. And he made a statement: gold is money and nothing else. He said everything else is credit. And that's exactly what the banking system is today. Basically, the gold market collapsed, Britain collapsed, the Bretton Woods Agreement started where the U.S. took over the world reserve currency status. So the U.S. dollar was now going to be the world currency, and it was going to be backed by gold, and that created the dollar and the gold standard. Then in 1933, after the Great Depression, all these countries around the world were starting to say, well, we want to redeem gold, we want to redeem gold. The United States didn't have enough. They made it illegal for any U.S. citizen to own gold. In 1933, they confiscated all the gold. It was illegal to even own it. And they had to do that because they needed it all back. Finally, in 1971, Richard Nixon said, that's enough. And then in 1974, United States citizens are allowed to own gold again. Now we're about 50 years into this fiat money experiment. What do we need gold for anymore? The central banks, so the Fed, the central bank, the ECB, the IMF, there's the BIS, there's all these central banks that run all these countries and all these currencies and basically run the world. And they're the ones that hold the gold. And then they give us funny money. They give us monopoly money. It's like if you were playing a game of Monopoly and you said, okay, tell you what, you give me, $20 of real money and I'll give you $100 of Monopoly money so you can play the game with it. But that Monopoly money is worthless, but you gave me real money. So they want us to believe that gold's worthless, the price isn't really going anywhere, what do we need it for anymore, all these things. Chances are you watching this right now probably don't own any gold. In 2018, the central banks added an incredible 651 tons of gold, almost $28 billion of gold. Why are they buying gold? That's a 74% change from 2017. It was the most amount of gold purchased by central banks going all the way back to 1971. So 1971 was when they broke the gold standard off, and of course everybody started buying gold. So then all the governments knew they were holding worthless currency, so they bought gold. So imagine that catalyst on 1971, why they bought that much. We just had the most record accumulation of gold since that date. Why? What's going on? The final quarter of 2018, which we just finished, the final quarter of 2018 had the most gold accumulated on record. For 6 years in a row, Russia has been the largest buyer, the largest accumulator of gold. Why? That's the good question, right? There was an interview, I'll put the links in the notes below. These people went and they interviewed all the central banks and asked them point blank, why do you own gold? And they went to each one of these countries, and I don't know how many there are, there's 15, 20 on the list, 30 on the list, and they asked each central bank, why do you own gold? And then they have their response there. And it's very interesting, I'll put the link down below if you want to read it. But basically what they all said was, because it's a store of value. That's where we store our value. They said, because it's a safe haven. We want to park there in case something happens. That's like a chaos hedge. They said that it's financial insurance. They said it's asset diversification. This is why they're adding more gold more than ever before. Well, since 1971, this is why they have it for all those reasons. So ask yourself, are you prepared? Do you have a store of value? Are you prepared to have financial insurance? Do you have asset diversification? Because they sure do. If they're the ones that know really what's going on, right? They're the ones setting this whole financial, economy and so forth. They're the ones that have that outlook. And so if they're doing something like that, right? We say it's like the smart money or success leaves clues, then maybe we should be doing the exact same things. Now, the gold market today is worth about $8 trillion. $8 trillion for all the gold. That doesn't include all the paper gold, but about the gold, $8 trillion. And that's real money. As JP Morgan said, right? Gold is money, nothing else. Gold, it's real assets, it's tangible. And like I said, the banks, what the central banks have said, all those reasons, insurance, it's a chaos hedge. In case everything goes wrong, if money hyperinflates, if whatever happens, if the central bank goes away and their money's worthless, I have gold. So it's a chaos hedge. We know trouble's brewing. Do you have insurance if you wreck your car? You probably do. Hopefully you do. Gold is also really good because it's hard to confiscate. So, for the most part, someone's going to have to come to your house, get into your safe, versus money in a bank account. They could just click a button, freeze your accounts, and it's gone. Anytime the bank could seize it, anytime you want to send it somewhere, they could take it, they could steal it, freeze it, manipulate it, etc. Gold, it can't be printed more. So right now, they're printing like $1 trillion a year, just $1 trillion, and each time they do it, inflates the money supply, makes it all worth less. But with gold, they can't do that. They can continue to mine it and bring it out of the ground, but it's at a very low level. It's what we call a stock to flow ratio. So the amount of stock that we have versus the amount of incoming flow. So we want to make sure that stock to flow ratio is good. That's the inflation level. And so we also have Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is like a digital gold now. And so Bitcoin is called digital gold because it has many of the same characteristics. It was kind of created for the exact same reason, to be a chaos hedge, to give us another option besides fiat currency. Like I said, the gold market is about $8 trillion. Bitcoin is about $60 billion. It's nowhere near $8 trillion. So that's the difference value-wise of Bitcoin and gold. Bitcoin's only been around 10 years. So it's not that trusted. But every day it lives on, the stronger it gets. But I also believe that Bitcoin is a chaos hedge. Bitcoin is a way for us to opt out of the system. It's a way for me to keep money there that's not tied to fiat currency. If gold is hard to confiscate, Bitcoin is also hard to confiscate. It's much harder to do. No one can just show up at your house and take that. The stock to flow ratio of gold is good because it's very hard to get more out of the ground. But the stock to flow ratio with Bitcoin is even harder. Eventually there's going to be no more. There's a hard fixed cap where there will be no more. So we know exactly what the stock to flow ratio is on Bitcoin because it's written into the code and it's halving every year. Gold is hard to divide. If I have a gold bar, it gets very difficult for me to break that down and buy a cup of coffee with that. Of course, I could go buy a little gram somewhere. I could take that to a jeweler, have them break that down for me. But of course, it's very difficult. It's hard. It's expensive. Whereas Bitcoin, it's easily divisible. I can pay for a cup of coffee, no problem. Now, gold does have an advantage in the sense that it's an elemental value. So it is an actual physical property that could be used for jewelry or electronics or things like that. Whereas Bitcoin, of course, is not physical and it doesn't have any use. So there's definitely pros and cons for both. Bitcoin is called the digital gold mainly because of its store of value properties. But there's other cryptocurrencies that are also digital gold. As a matter of fact, Bitcoin was not the first one. So way back in 1996, we had e-gold. And that was the first digital gold, actually 12 years before Bitcoin came out. We also had one called DigiCash. And so a lot of people think that Bitcoin may go the way of MySpace and then, the new one is going to be Facebook, or Bitcoin goes the way of Netscape, right? But I think that there's already been a few versions of Bitcoin before. Like I said, e-gold was there. If you wanted to buy gold, but you don't have a safe place to keep it, it's too big, it's too clunky, it's too expensive, you really like cryptocurrencies, there's a lot of ways using cryptocurrencies you can have exposure to gold. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're seeing a huge demand by central banks for gold. Why? Well, they see that there's chaos, there's crisis on the horizon, and they're trying to protect themselves. All the central banks around the world are adding to their gold reserves to be prepared. Financial insurance, that's what they said. So are you doing the same? Do you have financial insurance? Are you adding gold? Are you adding Bitcoin? Are you adding exposure to cryptocurrencies that could be a chaos hedge for you? If they're doing it, they know something you don't know, and you should probably be following the same lead that they are. Now, each central bank has its own levels. Typically, they're in the 5 to 20% of their reserves are in physical gold. Russia is really stepping up their game. I think they're at 17% of their reserves are in gold. I don't know if you need 17%, but I think a little exposure is probably something that you'd want to consider, especially considering the central banks are doing it. There's going to be a continued increase in demand for this. Now, I'm not here to say that, hey, this next crisis that happens, everyone's going to go to Bitcoin or digital gold instead of regular gold. And I just don't think that's the case. We're already seeing that central banks are buying gold. The central banks will be buying Bitcoin as well. We haven't really seen that yet, at least not that it's been, publicly known. I think there could be some buying going on with some of the smaller countries like North Korea, maybe China, Venezuela. We know that the governments, the United States, China, they've seized a lot of Bitcoin and they're sitting on a lot of Bitcoin that they own now because they've taken it away from other people. So I do believe we'll see governments and banks starting to buy and accumulate Bitcoin. For sure, we're going to see massive retail people buying Bitcoin. And it's one of those things where it's going to take multiple generations. So, gold is kind of old. It's like an old relic. And so the older people that are in part of the central banks, that's kind of what they still rely on. Whereas the new younger generation, they're looking for something new and something digital. So it's really something that's going to happen over a few generations. Difference between Bitcoin and digital gold. And we made the case line by line. And as you can see, they're very close. And so the way I see it is that, Bitcoin has a very limited supply. It gives me all the same features. It's way easier to buy, way easier to sell, way easier to transfer. And I think the younger generation is definitely going to be moving on that. Now, when are we going to see that adoption? And like I said, this next crisis, is everybody going to run right into Bitcoin instead of buying gold? I don't think that's the case. I wouldn't expect Bitcoin to take over gold for maybe 40, 50 years through multiple generations. Like my kids or my grandkids, that may be all they'll ever know. Because the gold market is so much bigger than Bitcoin, we don't really have to see that much. I mean, like I said, the Bitcoin or the gold market is over $8 trillion. So if If Bitcoin could pick off just 10%, which I think is totally doable, maybe in this next crisis, and then the next crisis will be more, the next crisis will be more, and maybe in, 30, 40, 50 years, we see a big chunk of that come over. Hope that makes sense. If you like this video, give me some thumbs up if you like it. If you don't like it, give me thumbs down. I want to know either way. Again, I love to have discussions with everybody in the comments, so make sure you do that. And let me know, do you own gold? And if no, are you going to consider adding it? I mean, the central banks are. They know something that you don't know, and you should probably consider it as well. Gold and Bitcoin, only gold, one or the other. Leave a comment and let me know. Hope that makes sense. To your success. I'm out.